this morning's Dhamma talk, I'm still keeping the subject matter on the practice of meditation and the insights which come from that meditation. But this morning's Dhamma talk is going to be especially focused on a metaphor, a simile, which does explain quite beautifully how meditation works and also answers some of the problems. One of those questions that comes up very often when people are meditating, following these instructions. Sometimes when they're meditating, they can be aware of their breathing, and the breathing is very stable and delightful. And then sometimes a light comes up, and they wonder what they should do. Should they go towards the light or stay with the breathing? And this particular talk will answer that question and many similar questions, because it uses a metaphor which is very helpful. But please excuse me, the metaphor began when I used to go as a Buddhist monk, when I was a lay person, searching for the type of Buddhism which inspired me. And of course, a couple of times you went to see Tibetan monks from the Mahayana tradition, or Vajrayana tradition. And you may know that they had a metaphor, and they used the phrase Om Mani Padme Hum. And of course, I think many of you will know that what that meant was like a worship, like a Namo, to the jewel in the heart of the lotus, in the Padma. And for many years, I knew that was very important to one tradition, but I use that as a simile for the path of meditation in our Theravada tradition. Not explaining it in the way that they were explaining it, but making use of it. And the wonderful part of this metaphor, it also makes it quite clear of how you should meditate, what you actually do, or more importantly, what you shouldn't do. Is the sound okay? Okay, yeah, very good. More like what you shouldn't do when you're meditating. And it shows just how the meditation grows quite naturally. And I love the simile of the lotus in Buddhism. It's used in many different contexts. And of course we have the very famous simile of a lotus growing in the mud, in the dirt, in the muck in the bottom of the lake. And that lotus growing up, till it reaches the surface of the lake, and then breaks through that surface of the lake. Even though it started off in very inauspicious situations, nevertheless it pushed through up into the light. And I'm sure that many of you will have similar stories. How when you were born, sometimes it's very difficult. Certainly when I was born, there was nobody in my family who was a Buddhist, and no one who could even spell Buddhism, let alone know what it was all about. So it was something quite weird that I became a Buddhist. And for those who don't know the story, it was, I went to a very poor school when I was my primary school, and from there got a scholarship to a really good high school, and then from the high school got my first school prize in mathematics. And I didn't know what to do with a school prize. I asked my teacher, and he told me to go and get some more books on maths. And I thought, you mean I'm going to waste my first school prize getting sort of some other books on maths? So I followed his instructions at first. And for those of you who know, one of the biggest bookshops in London is called Foyle's Bookshop, with many stories. And I noticed on the opposite side of the road, in the annex, in the attic of the annex, the top story, there were all these books on non-Christian religions and psychic things like ghosts. And that kind of interested me, even as a 16-year-old. So with the school prize, which I was supposed to get one book, I got many books, paperbacks, on all sorts of subjects which the headmaster of my school wasn't that impressed with. But nevertheless, I always thought that, religion, if you have freedom of religion, which we're supposed to have in a country like UK, then you should be able to make your own choice. And to make an informed choice, you need to do what is called these days market research. So I did my market research by getting books on all the major religions which I could find up there, and then reading through them and deciding what suited me. And of course the thing which really suited me was Buddhism. It's a weird thing, but when I read my first book on Buddhism, it wasn't that it converted me. It was just that I knew that this was who I always was. And I was a Buddhist, but I didn't know, because I didn't have anybody else to instruct me. And that was a wonderful thing to realize. You found out that how I thought, my perceptions on things like rebirth, that was something I thought was obvious when I was a young boy. And now I found out it was shared by so many others. And from that time on, I started calling myself a Buddhist, even though I didn't know any others. No other Buddhists in the whole world at that time. But anyway, you were like that lotus seed in the bottom of the lake in the mud. And little by little, you grew. And you got exposed to all the different types of Buddhism. And of course, the one I liked the best, which made the more sense to me, was the Theravada. And that was mostly because of the meditation. And some of the advice you got. Now, some of the advice I followed. Some of the advice I didn't follow. One of the pieces of advice which I got was from a Zen monk. Because when he visited UK for the first time, I went to the talk he gave, which was in the Thai temple in London. And after about 3 months touring around UK, we asked him what he thought of Buddhism in the UK. When this monk first came, he had to use a translator. But when he came back, he didn't need to translate his feelings and thoughts at all. When he was asked what does he feel about Buddhism in UK, and this would be in the late 1960s, he replied very simply but very articulately, books, 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 too many, too many, too many, dustbin, dustbin, dustbin. And it made quite a powerful point that in that time in the UK, there were many scholars, there were many experts, there were many people who knew what was in the books, but never practiced it. And to me, that made no sense at all. And later on, when I heard another Zen monk say, anyone who does write a book on Buddhism, the karmic consequence of writing a book on Buddhism is you have to be reborn as a donkey for your next 7 lifetimes. It's a good job I didn't believe that, because if I thought that was true, I'd have many, 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 many lives as a donkey to get through. What it was making very clear is that the teachings are great, the books are really helpful, but the practice is the most important. And especially as a monk or a nun, you're committed to this path, and you might as well make the best of it. The information is there, and you know most of that information enough that you do have, as I said, I think last night or yesterday, you do have a good map. All you need is a flashlight, the torch, to be able to find your way with the map to the treasure of the great wisdoms of Buddhism. But nevertheless, even though you've already got enough information, I've got another couple of days of information to give to you. And the simile today, is going to be again the lotus, but there's one more lotus simile which I really liked, and that was the lotus has this very unique quality that whatever liquid falls on it, it always runs off, and it leaves no residue. So if somebody urinates on a beautiful lotus, the urine just all drips off. And after it's all dripped off, there's none of it remains. And the lotus still smells like a lotus flower. It doesn't smell like a toilet seat. And if you do the opposite, if you pour perfume over that lotus, then that perfume all goes off, drips off the lotus, and the lotus still smells like a lotus, never the scent of the perfume. And I always love that simile, because that's about praise and blame. Doesn't matter who you are in this world, even the Buddha was blamed, got criticism. Even the Buddha was praised. And each one of you, at whatever level you are on the path, and whoever you are as a senior monk, a junior monk, a novice monk, upasaka, upasika, you will always get both that praise and blame. So what do you do with it? Any blame is like urine. You allow it to fall off you, and it keeps no residue. There are so many wonderful stories about blame. This was one which Ajahn Chah told me, again about almost 50 years ago now. This was when the Vietnam War was still going on, and there was a US Air Force base not that far from his monastery in Ubon. On this one occasion, there was an African-American soldier who was going from the base into the town of Ubon. He was going in one of these cycle rickshaws. And on the journey, the rickshaw passed some of the driver's friends. And the driver's friends were on a roadside bar drinking Mekong whiskey and getting drunk. And because they were drunk, they looked at this passenger in the back of the rickshaw, this big African-American shoulder, and shouted out to him, "Where are you taking that dirty dog to?" Now that is a very nasty thing to say in Asia, calling someone a dog and calling them dirty. And so even the rickshaw driver was very afraid. He turned around to the African-American soldier, and the African-American soldier was just looking at the scenery, enjoying the beauty of those paddy fields and that time of the morning. So the driver thought this soldier doesn't understand the local language. So the driver joined in. "Look how dirty he is. I'm going to take him into town to throw him in the river for a good wash. Ha 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 ha." And the soldier was just looking around at the scenery. The soldier had been very badly abused. So what do you think the soldier did? this is what happened next. When they got into town, the soldier got out of the rickshaw and started walking away. And when the rickshaw drivers said, money, fare, you owe me dollars, it was at that point that the American soldier turned around and said in fluent Isan language, which was the local language there, dogs don't have money. So the African-American soldier got a free ride. And that story went all around the town of Ubon, and they praised that African-American's wisdom. You get abused, you no need to fight. There's other ways you can deal with any of those problems. And it's the same when you get praised. If you do get praised, there's no need to keep it and think, at last, there's somebody in this retreat who's got some wisdom. They praise what I say. No. Just praise and blame is something which you should not really keep. Instead, let it all run off yourself or off your memory, just like perfume off a lotus. But my favorite story about a lotus is the story of how a lotus opens up in the morning. You've all seen lotuses in the pond, and when that lotus is in the pond at night time, it closes up. And when it's closed up, if you take a look at that lotus, the outermost sheaf of petals are like corrugated. They're rough, they're often dirty, because it's the outermost sheath has to protect the inner petals from the wind and the dust. And if you didn't know what a lotus was, you'd have a look at those outermost petals, and you never ever think that inside could there be anything really beautiful. In the same way that when a person comes on a meditation retreat, and I've been teaching these for many years, I can never tell which one is going to have the deep meditations. You think I would know after all these years, but I've been totally fooled for so many times. Some of the people I least expected get some of the most beautiful deep meditations. And some of the people I thought, it must be easy for you, you're so close. Sometimes they don't get anywhere. And I say that not to actually to take away your confidence that you can do these things, but to almost impress that you are capable of getting some of the deepest meditations and deepest insights. And the story of the lotus tells you why. So when the sun comes up in the morning and the warmth and light of the sun hits the outermost petals of the lotus, then the lotus starts to open up. The two most important things are the warmth and the light of the sun. And as those outermost petals open up, then they reveal the first layer of real petals. They have got the color of the lotus. They may even have some fragrance, a natural fragrance. But they are still quite thick, those outermost petals. But once the sheath has opened up, then the warmth and the light of the sun can now fall on those next layer of petals. And those layer of petals can also open up. And that reveals the second layer of petals. The second layer of petals is more thin, more profound, more fragrant, more beautiful. And only now, when they receive the warmth and light of the sun, can they open up. And layer by layer and layer of petals can begin to open up. Only when the one outside them is opened up, only then can they receive the warmth and light of the sun. And they open up one by one, and those petals get more beautiful, more fragrant, more profound as you go deeper into the lotus. And I hopefully, if you haven't heard that simile before, at least you get some understanding of its meaning. What does you actually stand for the lotus? Which is one of the reasons why sometimes you get the most unpromising lotuses come to see the Buddha. I'm talking about not just Angulimala, the serial killer, talking also about people like Patachara, who came into the Buddhist sermon totally naked and mad. She'd lost her husband, 2 children and 2 parents on the same day. Somebody who most people would say, get out of here. If you want to come and listen to a sermon, at least be properly dressed. But the Buddha invited her in. And I love the story of Patachara because she became one of the greatest teachers. I don't know if you've ever read the Therigatha as well as the Theravada, but in the Therigatha I was reading it, and then many of these nuns in the time of the Buddha, bhikkhunis, many were telling about the story of their own enlightenment. They say for years they were practicing meditation and getting nowhere. No sort of progress, no deep understanding, until they met this great teacher, and she only taught them just for a few days, and they broke through into deep meditation and great insights. And then when I read that again and again, bhikkhuni after bhikkhuni after bhikkhuni, then I found out that bhikkhuni's name was Patachara. She's an incredibly great teacher. And sometimes I wondered why. What's so special about a teacher like that? And it's only a theory, this is not confirmed by the suttas, but you know that for many years I've described how to use dung. And even one of the books which I wrote, was given the title, Who Ordered This Truckload of Dung? And that was published in the United States. And the story grabbed people's attention because the metaphor was that a lay person goes to work or goes out for the weekend. When they come home, they find that somebody has dumped a whole truckload, a whole lorry load of dung right in front of the door of your house. And there's 2 things to remember about that dung. Number 1, you did not order it. You're not responsible, but it's there. And number 2, no one saw the delivery lorry coming, so you cannot ring up anyone to get them to take it away. You're stuck with that dung. And of course, there's 2 things you can do with that dung. Most people will just put it in their pockets, put it in their bags, put it up their shirts, and carry it around with them. And you find if you carry around the dung of your life, the unfair things which have been done to you, you'll find if you carry around dung, you lose a lot of friends. No one wants to be with you. Basically, you stink. But there's, of course, a much better way of using that dung, much harder work. You put it in wheelbarrows, you wheel it to the back of your house or hut or temple, whatever it is, and you dig it in. And once you dig in that dung, again, as you know, the garden becomes so much more fruitful, sweet, and so that you soon have so many mangoes, so many whatever, bananas or whatever else you eat, so many more flowers. They're richer, more fragrant, more beautiful than you've ever had before. That's what we should always do with the unfortunate experiences of our life. We dig them in. And I've seen in my life many people with great meditation, really deep, but they can't teach. Why? And my theory is because they do not have enough dung in their life. The more dung you have, the more powerful are your teachings. That's one of the reasons why Patachara had so much dung. Her teachings, her understandings were so powerful. I think that's one of the reasons she became one of the great female teachers. But I also remember, this is going off subject a bit, that how the Bhikkhuni Patachara became a fully enlightened nun. She'd obviously had the deep meditations already, but to get that wisdom, to become the stream winner, and then later on fully enlightened, how that happened was she was watching the oil lamp. And the oil lamp is, you have seen the oil lamps here in Sri Lanka, just a wick floating on oil, and you light the wick, and then you get a light which you can see. And when she was watching that, the wind blew the flame out. And at that, she saw the Dhamma. What does that mean? The flame is just a result of three things. The flame is just caused by the wick, the oil, and the heat. And if any one of those three gets exhausted, there's no more wick left, it's all burnt through, the oil is gone, or someone blows out the heat, then what happens to the flame? It just niputas, how the party would call it. It just goes out. And in that simile of the flame in the Agi Vachagota Sutta, that the Buddha said, or Agi Vachagota, the wanderer, was wondering what happens to the flame. The Buddha said, does the flame go to the east, the west, the north, the south? Or let's modernize this. Does the flame go to the heaven of all flames if they behaved and not burnt anybody? Or does the flame go to the hell realm of all naughty flames who burn somebody or burn your house down? Where does the flame go? And of course that's a stupid question. Flames go nowhere. They were just phenomena which was caused by three things. When one of those three things stop, so does the flame. And that's a very powerful simile of Buddhism, simple but powerful. You're just caused. When you know those causes, when any one of those causes goes out, so do you. Where do you go? The question does not apply. So anyway, that was Patachara. She became fully enlightened. I think, well, not fully enlightened or a stream winner, but certainly had one of those experiences when the flame she was using blew out and disappeared. But anyway, back to the lotus. As that lotus starts to open, because of the two things, which is the warmth and the heat, what does the warmth and heat signify in meditation? It's a pretty obvious simile. The warmth is the kindness, the light is the mindfulness. The kindfulness. Mindfulness enough is not sufficient to open your lotus. Just to be aware, you'll find your awareness will wander somewhere else. When you combine the mindfulness with the kindness, with the warmth, you find it easy to sustain your awareness there on something you are kind to. And hopefully you've experienced that when you do things like watching your breath or just doing a sweeping meditation, to combine the kindness and the mindfulness. So this is what happens on that lotus. The outermost sheath of that lotus is your ordinary body and mind, the thing which bears your name. And as you start shining mindfulness and kindness, the light and warmth of the sun on your body, it kind of just opens up to you. When you do a body sweep, you're being much more refined. And the outermost petals open up to reveal what's inside. Now you can change these descriptions of the petals, but it usually works. The first thing you notice on the outside of this mind, again, is the body. That does need to open out so you can see your mind. I don't mean the pure mind, just these mental processes. That's one of the reasons why the Kayagata Sati is important before you go on to do things like breath meditation or loving kindness meditation or anything else. It opens out this body, it relaxes it so it can open out, you can see what's inside. And that metaphor of always going inside is also important. So as you open up this body and you see inside, one of the first things which you see is what I call the prison of time. Why are we just so concerned with what's coming next? So burdened by what we've done in the past. That's like allowing yourself to be in the prison of the past. You know that, of course, I make lovely discussions with many psychologists and psychiatrists, and many of them know how important it is to let go of the past and let go of the future. How do you do that? Even as monks, can you let go of the past? Can you let go of the future? The future is much easier to let go of, I have found. So let's start with how you let go of the past. Sometimes people want to ignore the past. Sometimes that is like feeding the anger-eating monster. The more you try to ignore it, the louder it knocks on your door. So we don't ignore the past. We acknowledge the past with loving kindness. And to me, the most important part of letting go of the past is being kind to all the people who were involved in your past, and being kind to yourself at the same time you're involved in the past. With that kindness, that metta, that karuna together, you will find it's much easier to soften the past. The anger makes it hard. The kindness makes it soft. And when it gets really, really soft, it's much easier to forgive everybody and all things which happened in that past. The kindness is what works. And to go off on a tangent now, but you may find this, if not helpful for oneself and one's own practice, certainly helpful for other people you meet. And that is an organization which the main people come to our centre in Perth. It's called what's it called again? It's for that's why it's called assets. It's called the Australian Society for Survivors of Torture and Trauma. As you know, in this world, there are many people go through such horrendous tortures and traumas, not because of anything they did, other than their parents were politicians or important people, or they get caught up in conflicts, political conflicts, and they disappear into underground jails run by all sorts of bad people, you might call, and they get tortured. And some of these manage to survive, and many of these would come to a place like Australia with an asylum visa. They get freedom of their body in a place like Australia, but still their minds are caught in the terrible things which they endured for no reason at all at the hands of some awful people, and that keeps coming back to them. They're traumatized. And I was very impressed to find out how some of the teachings you give in a Buddhist temple become so effective at dealing with these almost unendurable experiences from the past. And what they do in this society of survivors of torture and trauma, they use a very simple loving kindness meditation based on that explanation of loving kindness called opening the door of your heart. And I hope you remember that interpretation of loving kindness, of unconditional loving kindness, came from my own father, who once told me, "Son, whatever happens to you in your life, however you turn out, good or bad, I don't know. Please remember the door of my house will always be open to you, no matter how you turn out." And I realized it wasn't his house he meant, it was his heart. And for years that became how I interpreted and understood unconditional loving kindness. And this is what this group used for survivors of torture and trauma. When they felt safe, and that was really important, to do things like meditation, or to understand some of the things which happened to you in the past and get past them, you do need to have that feeling of safety, not forced, always having a means to get out if it's not working for you. And they sit down comfortably, and then someone helps them. As you sit down, you imagine in your heart region 2 big doors. You open those doors. You are inside. And the good part of you, the soul of you which you can love and care for, is already inside. But then these victims of torture and trauma, just imagine they're looking outside, and in the cold, stony concrete, they see this little girl who was brutally raped, the kid who was beaten, the person who was tortured. They see all these little beings outside, which were them in the past. And then they lower a ladder down from those 2 doors above their heart. And once the ladder meets the ground, they look at all the people they can remember from their past, and they invite them in. Instead of trying to keep them out of their own heart, they do a very scary thing. Come inside. You're who I am. You're my past. And little by little, each one of these beings, you can remember that was you as a little kid. That was you as a young girl. That was you as a new wife who got so badly beaten and treated by people you trusted. Each one of those comes up. And as they come up that ladder, those steps into your heart, you welcome them, embrace them with kindness. That is incredibly effective. When you treat the past with kindness, instead of with anger, with saying, why me, with fear, and you give this wonderful forgiveness, then it's dealt with. So often in the past, there's amazing stories of forgiveness, of kindness, where you think it should be impossible. One of my favorite stories of dealing with that past and being able to let it go was recorded in those Truth and Reconciliation Commissions led by Desmond Tutu, and I think it was Mandela was supporting it, in South Africa. And in this particular episode, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was promising amnesty for anyone who confessed honestly to some of the extrajudicial punishments and killings which they meted out on people. And it was one of these South African policemen, secret police, was telling everybody in one of these formal meetings how he had tortured and killed this black African nationalist, or freedom fighter, whatever you wish to call it, in front of the man's wife. The widow had just heard this noise in the middle of the night, and her husband, the father of her children, was taken away, and she never saw him again. And now this man was saying what he did to him. And this man confessing what he did, it was very hard for him to confess the terrible things which he had done. It was so hard that he was shaking and crying as he was giving his testimony. When he'd finished, the widow of this black African deceased freedom fighter, whatever, just jumped over the barricade, and she avoided 2 security officers. She was big but very agile, and these people were supposed to protect the people who had done these terrible crimes from the widows and other lovers of these people who had done these crimes. But she was too fast for them. And so she grabbed this South African policeman, put her arms around him while he was shaking in fear, and said the wonderful words, "I forgive you." And everybody burst into tears. I like telling that story. If you can forgive that, what in the world can you not forgive? And so that was a wonderful example. If you treat the past with kindness, it's easy to forgive, and you can be free of it. That's all it takes. One beautiful act of forgiveness. I don't know what you've experienced in your life, but once you can forgive the past, you never forget it, but it's not a problem for you anymore. You understand that this is the world we're born into, and it's a test of us, how easy it is to forgive and move forward. And that becomes this lotus petals open out. We're not burdened by the past anymore. And the future, again, no one will ever know the future. I know many people think, oh, you're a monk, you have good meditation. Can you please tell us know what's going to happen in Ukraine? Ajahn Brahm, please let us know. And of course, the future is always work in progress. No one can ever know. Even Ajahn Chah, when he was asked by one of his disciples, look, you've got great meditation, read the palms on my hand and tell me my future. And Ajahn Chah said, no, monks don't do that. He said, well, I know you can. And I've given you so much donations, fed you, looked after you, stopped my work to drive you somewhere when you needed it. And it's the first time I've asked you anything. Come on, read the lines on my palm of my hand. So for once and the only time Ajahn Chah did that. He looked at the man's hand and read the lines on the palm of his hand. And this man was so excited. Ajahn Chah was honest, deep meditation, incredibly wise. And when he'd finished reading the lines on the man's palm, the man said, yes, yes, what's my future going to be? And Ajahn Chah replied, look, I will not tell a lie. I will not exaggerate. But your future, sir, is uncertain. And Ajahn Chah wasn't wrong. You know, once, I'm going off subject again and again and again. You know, once, when it was my birthday, some of my disciples decided, what can you give a monk who wants nothing for his birthday? So they asked for my birth date, not just the birth date, the time and the place where I was born. And I could find that details out for this man. And then off he went. And on my birthday he said, I've used that information. I spent a lot of money on this to getting your horoscope for the next 12 months from one of the most expensive and famous astrologers I know. Can I read it out? So when everyone was listening, he read out Ajahn Brahm's horoscope, not an ordinary one, but a really deep one, by this expert. And it started off, he read out in public, that Ajahn Brahm, who was born 7th of August 1951 at this particular time in this particular place, the next 12 months will be a wonderful time for romance. We never got further. Everyone burst out laughing. I'm still a monk, so they were wrong. You cannot tell the future. Isn't it wonderful to know? We make the future. You're not limited by the future. So you can make whatever you want with that confidence and hard work and mindfulness and kindness. So in particular, you go inside of time to this wonderful present moment, which is much more beautiful than the past or future. If you recognize this moment, no matter what you experience, it's much better than being anywhere else in the whole world. And then you can stay in the beautiful present moment. That's a part of the lotus. When you're staying in the present moment, you don't need to do anything. You just maintain the kindness and the mindfulness, the light and warmth of the sun. And that's going to open up into something more beautiful. It opens up into silence. Inside the present moment, you don't need to say anything inside. You don't need to think. You don't need to describe. You don't need to name. This is a terrible habit which has been conditioned into us. Whatever we experience, we want to give a name to it. There are only so many names in the dictionary. We're limited to how we can describe things. But that compulsion to give something a name sometimes makes us think and say things which are just approximations, that's all. When you see a colour, the colour of these blinds over there, they red or blue? What colour are they? There's so many different shades of red. So when I say a red blind over there, whatever it's called, it's inaccurate. Any word you say is only an approximation. And sometimes we believe in those approximations and argue who's got the best approximation. That's all philosophical arguments are about. But inside those petals of time, in the present moment, that opens up and you experience silence, which is always more beautiful than anything else. I'm sure you have many examples of silence, but one which I will never forget was when I was visiting UK, visiting the monastery they had in Sussex in Chithurst. And because I was a visitor having no duties, I could do what I wanted. And I was a pretty stupid English monk. They always say mad dogs and Englishmen go out not in the midday sun, but in the mid-morning freezing minus 26 degrees snowfields. It was one of the coldest days in UK when I went out of that monastery and walked in the forest. It was worth it. Because of the snow, no cars were on the road. All the roads were blocked by snow. There was no people around, no one in their cars, all the airports were closed, there was no flights overhead. All the animals were still in their burrows, hibernating. It was like I had the whole forest to myself. There was a stream in that forest, but it was iced over. When I stopped walking, there was no sound at all. It's like the whole universe stopped with me. That silence, I will never forget. If you understand silence, it's one of the most beautiful experiences. There's no sound, there's no orchestra, there's no symphony can ever match how wonderful silence is. So when you go inside the present moment and experience silence, that is amazing. And once you're in the silence, you can stay there pretty easily with the kindfulness. You don't do anything. You have this beautiful sense of respect and awareness and kindness, and this silence opens up. Strange, but when you just do this without trying to plan anything or do anything, what happens inside the silence, believe it or not, is your breathing. It's one of the last things which are moving. I remember they had these sensory deprivation chambers that came over to Perth many years ago. These tanks, and in these tanks the water is at body temperature. It's salt water, so you just float in them. There's no aches and pains anywhere in your body. You're just floating. And it is the light, it's closed off, it's light free, so you can't see anything. It's sound free. And it's almost an idyllic place to meditate. There is no distractions at all. No bodily problems, it's just warm body temperature, so you don't feel hot, you don't feel cold. No sound, no sight. Those things are cut off for you. But what you feel, what you experience is your breath becomes so noticeable. I mention that because this is what happens inside the silence. You can notice your breath so easily. It's the last thing which is moving. So this becomes another layer of petals inside the silence, the breath. That's one of the reasons why I say that the Buddha taught the breath meditation. It's a natural type of meditation. It happens whether you like it or not. You can bypass it, but it's a natural type of meditation. And inside the ordinary breath, breathing in, breathing out, as you meditate more and more, you look at your breath with just mindfulness and kindness, the warmth and light of the sun, that opens out into the delightful breath. It's almost a different layer of petals, much more beautiful, much more refined, much more fragrant. And when you're looking at the delightful breath for long enough, you don't need to aspire for anything. You don't do anything. You don't make any progress. Those petals open out, and what's inside of the delightful breath? And what's inside of the delightful breath is usually what we call the nimitta. So what actually happens if you're watching a beautiful, delightful breath, and then you kind of see a light coming, but then that light vanishes? What's actually happening? This metaphor is like you're opening up. You get this delightful breath set of petals. Now that's opening up, and you get a peek of what's inside, beautiful nimitta. But then it closes up again, and you're still with the delightful breath. You don't need to do anything. This is a natural. You don't choose. You just keep the mindfulness and the kindness happening. And then it's only a matter of time when the mindfulness and kindness is ready, is enough. Then that layer of petals called the delightful breath opens up by itself. As long as you don't get excited or afraid, and these beautiful nimittas arise. You're going deeper into your lotus. And if you experience even those nimittas, you remember that this is in this old closed lotus you thought you knew before. In each one of you, right now, there's a beautiful nimitta. Just need to open up those outermost petals. And once you have the nimitta, what do? You never make any progress. Your job is to go inside of the nimitta. Allow that nimitta to open up and see what's inside. And of course you know what's inside. Inside that nimitta is the first jhana. You don't move on to something else. You always move in. Always going inwards. And at this time, the mindfulness and the kindness, you can't do much about that. It's either there or it's not there. It's strong or it's not strong. If it's strong enough, the jhana opens up, the first jhana. And inside the first jhana, you experience the second jhana like a special case. Right within the first jhana is the second jhana. And as you're watching that second jhana, if that's not enough to satisfy you, all by itself, that opens up to experience the third jhana. That opens up to experience the fourth jhana. They were all inside the one before. Layers of petals opening up. You're getting deep into the heart of the lotus. And after the fourth jhana, if you can stay there, that opens up. And after that opens up, you get to the first arupa. And these are getting very refined layers of petals. Things like, they call it, sometimes it's called, what do they call it? The infinity of space and then the infinity of consciousness. I don't like that word infinity. I prefer like a word like no boundary. I like the word no boundary because I used to compare it to something like present moment awareness. In the present moment awareness, how long is the present moment? It hasn't got a width, it's just a moment. It's nothing, but it's like everything at the same time. And when you get to this perception of, it means that the idea of space is disappearing, it's almost gone. The infinity of consciousness. That's where consciousness is starting to disappear. And that disappears inside of that layer of petals. Nothing. And that makes kind of difficult sense for many people. How can you be aware of nothing? If you are aware of nothing, your awareness is going to shut off soon. And that's what happens. You get to this perception of neither perception nor non-perception. You see what's there and there's nothing there at all. Totally gone. But something's knowing that. And when that turns off, that's your mind stopped for a while. Ceased. You've gone into the heart of the lotus. That's why praise to the jewel in the heart of the lotus. You know what that jewel is? In the middle of the lotus, which is you, which is what you take to be yourself. You'll find, just like Ajahn said, there's nothing there. Thank you for listening. Okay.